It is a perfect morning in Tallahassee, Florida. The sun is shining, the palm trees are swaying, and Dan Markel, a brilliant Harvard-educated law professor, pulls into his driveway. He has just finished a workout. He's thinking about his kids. He's thinking about his next lecture. But he has no idea that in exactly 3 seconds, everything he knows will be taken away. He doesn't see the car that followed him. He doesn't see the gun barrel through the window. 2 sharp cracks echo through the air. And just like that, a brilliant future is extinguished in an instant. Now, usually, when a life is taken so abruptly in his driveway, you look for a robber, you look for a gang member, or a random act of violence. But this was not random. This was a targeted strike. So, who wanted Dan Markel out of the picture? Prepare yourselves, because the suspects in this case are not career criminals. They don't have tattoos on their faces. They don't live in the shadows. They live in mansions. They drive Mercedes. They are the Adelsons, a family of wealthy, successful dentists, the very definition of the American dream. But behind the white smiles and the expensive suits, there was something rotting. This wasn't just a family. It was a fortress. They suffered from a psychological condition often called toxic enmeshment. Imagine a family so close, so obsessed with each other, that there are no boundaries. The mother, Donna, is the general. The son, Charlie, is the soldier. And anyone who threatens their control, like an ex-son-in-law trying to get custody of the grandchildren, is not treated like a human being. They are treated like a tumor. And what do doctors do with tumors? They perform a permanent extraction. Here is the problem that haunted the police for years. Everyone knew why it happened. The motive was obvious: a bitter divorce and a custody battle. But knowing it and proving it are 2 very different things. The Adelsons were smart, terrifyingly smart. They didn't pull the trigger. They didn't even speak to the killers directly. They built a wall of insulation. They used layers of middlemen. They used cash. They used codes. They believed they had committed the perfect crime because they never got their hands dirty. The police had the body. They eventually found the hitmen, but they could not touch the family. The Adelsons were calm. They were arrogant. They believed they were untouchable because there was no physical evidence linking the dentist's office to the crime scene. For years, it looked like they were going to get away with it. The case was going cold. The files were gathering dust, and the Adelsons went on with their wealthy lives, laughing at the justice system. But they forgot one thing. They forgot that the FBI understands psychology just as well as they do. The detectives realized they couldn't find the evidence, so they had to create the evidence. They needed to make the family panic. They needed to make them turn on each other. So, the FBI came up with a plan. It wasn't a raid. It wasn't an arrest warrant. It was a piece of paper, a simple printed flyer, handed to an old woman on a sunny street. This specific moment, known as the bump, is one of the most brilliant psychological traps in law enforcement history. In that case, I'll show you how a strange conversation on a sidewalk caused a multi-million-dollar conspiracy to collapse like a house of cards. Let's listen to the wiretaps. Let's analyze the panic. But first, we have to go back to the beginning. To understand the trap, you need to understand the toxicity that made it possible. The silence of that neighborhood in Benton Hills is broken, first by the neighbor's call to 911, panicked and breathless, then by the sirens. Within minutes, the quiet sanctuary of a professor is swarming with police tape, flashing blue lights, and detectives trying to make sense of a nightmare. Dan Markel is rushed to the hospital, but it is too late. The question hangs heavy in the humid Florida air. Why? Detectives immediately look at the scene. Nothing was stolen. His wallet was there. His gym bag was there. This was not a robbery. This was personal. And in the world of major crime investigations, personal usually leads to one place: the ex-spouse. Naturally, all eyes turn to Wendy Adelson. Dan's ex-wife. They had a messy divorce. Dan was fighting hard to keep Wendy from moving the children to South Florida, away from him. The tension was explosive. But here is where the investigation hits its first wall. A red herring. A false lead that looks perfect, but leads nowhere. On the day of the murder, Wendy seems to have an ironclad alibi. She wasn't at the house. She was with friends. She was running errands. She even drove near the crime scene, saw the police tape and turned around. When police interviewed her, she cried. She seemed devastated. She even told them,
"My brother joked about hiring professional help to handle things once, but he wouldn't actually do it."
To the average person, this looks like a grieving ex-wife. But to a seasoned detective, it felt rehearsed. It felt like a performance. But feelings are not evidence. You cannot arrest someone for acting weird. To understand why this murder happened, we have to leave the crime scene and enter the mind of the Adelson family. This is where the psychology gets dark. Most families have boundaries. You have your life. Your parents have theirs. But the Adelsons suffered from toxic enmeshment. Think of this family like a single organism with multiple heads. Donna Adelson, the mother, was the brain. Charlie Adelson, the wealthy dentist's son, was the muscle, or at least the wallet. Wendy was the golden child who needed to be protected at all costs. In their minds, Dan Markel wasn't just an annoying ex-husband. By refusing to let Wendy take the grandchildren to South Florida, he was attacking the organism. He was an existential threat to Donna's control over her family. This creates a psychological state called narcissistic rage. When a narcissist is told no, they don't just get angry. They want to destroy the person who said it. They justified the act not as a crime, but as a necessity. In their twisted logic, they were saving Wendy. While the Adelsons were sitting comfortably in South Florida feeling safe, the police in Tallahassee were getting a break. They found a witness who saw a car speeding away, a silver Toyota Prius. Imagine hours of boring, grainy CCTV footage, detectives staring at screens until their eyes burn. And then, they spot the Prius following Dan Markel's car. They track it back to a rental agency, and the rental leads them to two men, Sigfredo Garcia and Luis Rivera. These men are the opposite of the Adelsons. They are street guys, gang members. They have no reason to take the life of a law professor. They don't know Dan Markel. They don't care about custody battles. So, why were they there? Here is the problem. You have the shooters and you have the beneficiaries, but there is a massive canyon between them. The Adelsons were smart enough not to call the hitmen directly. There were no texts, no checks, no direct links. They had built a wall of insulation. They used a middleman, specifically Charlie's girlfriend at the time, a woman named Katie Magbanwa. She was the bridge. Charlie talked to Katie. Katie talked to the hitman. The detectives knew it. They could smell the conspiracy. But knowing it isn't enough for a jury. If you were on that jury, would you send a wealthy doctor to prison for life just because his girlfriend knew a guy? Who knew a guy? Probably not. You would need proof. The Adelsons knew this. They relied on this silence. They believed the wall would never break because everyone involved was getting paid or was too scared to talk. The investigation stalled. The years passed, and the Adelsons thought they had won. But the FBI was watching, and if they couldn't find a crack in the wall, they were going to have to smash one open. While the Adelsons were living their best lives, drinking wine, treating patients, going to the beach, the police were building a map, not a map of roads, but a map of invisible signals. In modern crime, you can wash the gunpowder off your hands. You can burn your clothes. You can even melt the gun. But there is one thing you cannot destroy, unless you destroy your entire life, your digital footprint. The detectives didn't have a witness who saw the face of the killer, but they had something better. They had the cell phone towers. Let me explain simply how this works. Imagine a cell phone tower is like a giant lighthouse. Every time your phone is on, it is waving to the lighthouse, saying, "I am here." Even if you don't make a call, your phone is constantly shaking hands with the nearest tower. When the police pulled the data, They didn't just see numbers. They saw a story. They saw the digital ghosts of the two hitmen, Garcia and Rivera. The data showed their phones leaving Miami. It showed them traveling north on the highway, arriving in Tallahassee and stalking Dan Markel's neighborhood. And then, right after the murder, it showed them fleeing back to Miami. It was a perfect digital line drawn from the crime scene to the hitmen's home base. But catching the hitmen wasn't the goal. The goal was the Adelsons. This is where the forensic analysts found the fatal pattern, what prosecutors call a daisy chain. Imagine a row of dominoes falling. Domino 1, the tragedy strikes. Domino 2, immediately after the shots are fired, one of the hired hands calls the middleman, Katie Magbanua. Domino 3, what is the very next thing Katie does? Does she call 911? Does she call her mom? No, she calls Charlie Adelson. This pattern happened over and over again. The hitmen call Katie. Katie calls Charlie. Charlie calls Katie. Katie calls the hitmen. It was a closed loop, a perfect circle of communication. The data proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that these three groups were talking to each other, exactly when the murder was being planned and executed. Then they found the physical link, the money. One of the hired hands eventually cracked and told police about the payment, but it wasn't a bank transfer. It was cash, damp and moldy cash. Why was the money moldy? Because the Adelsons were so prepared for this crime that they had kept stacks of $100 bills stapled together, literally stapled, hidden away for so long that the humidity had damaged the paper. When the hitmen spent this money, it was a tangible and physical connection to the wealthy dentist. So, case closed, right? The police have the shooters. They have the connection to Charlie via phone records. They have the money trail. Wrong. This is the most frustrating part of the story. If you took this evidence to court, the Adelsons' expensive lawyers would destroy it. They would say,
So what? Charlie called his girlfriend. Is it a crime to talk to your girlfriend? You have no recording of what they said. Maybe they were talking about dinner.
You are just guessing. And they would be right. The phone records proved contact, but they didn't prove conspiracy. The police knew the Adelsons were guilty. The FBI knew it, but they couldn't prove it. The Adelsons were disciplined. They never spoke about the murder on the phone. They were insulating themselves perfectly. The detectives realized that traditional forensics had taken them as far as they could go. Science had hit a wall. To catch a family this arrogant, they didn't need more math. They needed a psychological bomb. They needed to force the Adelsons to break their own rules. They needed the bump. This is the moment where the story turns into a spy thriller. The FB. I realized that the Adelsons were too disciplined to talk on the phone. They needed to force a conversation. They needed to inject chaos into the system. It is a warm afternoon in South Beach, Florida. Donna Adelson, the matriarch, is walking down the street. She is on her way to meet Charlie for lunch. She feels safe. She feels insulated. Suddenly, a man walks up to her. He looks a little rough. He holds out a piece of paper, hands it to her, and says something that makes her blood freeze.
We know what your son did, and it's going to cost you. Take this.
He walks away. Donna looks at the paper. It is a grainy photo of Dan Markel, the man who lost his life 2 years ago. And scrawled on it are a phone number and a demand for firm $5,000. Now, put yourself in the jury box. If you are an innocent grandmother and a stranger hands you a flyer implying your son killed someone, what do? You scream. You run to the nearest police officer. You say, "Some crazy man just threatened me." But Donna Adelson doesn't call the police. She calls Charlie. This is exactly what the FBI was waiting for. They had Clarinet, the wiretap, active on Charlie's phone and Donna's phone. They were listening live. And what they heard was not a mother and son confused by a prank. They heard two co-conspirators panicking. But remember, they are smart. They start speaking in a code so bizarre, it sounds like a bad play. Donna calls Charlie. Her voice is shaking. She says, "I have some papers. I want you to look at them. It's very important." Charlie, sensing the panic, tries to shut her up. Don't talk about it. Just come here. The most damning piece of evidence comes from a meeting right after the bump. Charlie and Donna meet at a restaurant called Dolce Vita. It's noisy. They think the background noise will hide their voices. But the FBI is sitting at the next table. On the recording, you hear Charlie Adelson spinning a web of logic to calm his mother down. He isn't asking, "Mom, did we do this?" He is calculating the risk. He tells her,
If the police knew, we would be in handcuffs. This isn't the police. This is blackmail.
he is right. It was blackmail, simulated by the FBI, but his reaction proves his guilt. An innocent man doesn't debate the price of blackmail. An innocent man calls 911. Over the next few days, the phone calls continue. They become more cryptic. They start talking about a TV that is broken. They talk about buying a TV for $5,000. The FBI analysts are sitting in a room, headphones on, decoding this in real time. The TV equals the murder plot. The repairman equals the hitman. The gift equals the hush money. It was a brilliant strategic battle. The FBI was squeezing them, increasing the pressure every hour, waiting for one of them to crack. But there was a moment where everything almost fell apart. Charlie was so arrogant, so confident in his intelligence, that he almost convinced himself it was a police trap. He kept telling Donna, "Don't pay it, ignore it." If they had ignored it, the FBI might have lost their leverage. But Donna couldn't handle the pressure. The enmeshment that made them strong was now their weakness. She needed Charlie to fix it. She kept pushing. She kept calling. She kept talking. Finally, Charlie made the mistake. He started talking to his girlfriend, Katie. He explained the blackmail to her. He connected the dots. The wiretaps caught him explaining exactly how the two guys, the hitmen, must have talked. He closed the loop himself. The FBI didn't need a confession. They had Charlie Adelson explaining the conspiracy on tape, trying to solve the problem of the blackmail. They had him. We move from the humid streets of Miami to the sterile and freezing cold air of the Leon County Courthouse. It is 2023. 9 years have passed since Dan Markel was murdered. The hitmen are in prison. The middleman, Katie, is in prison. But now, finally, the prince of the family, Charlie Adelson, is sitting at the defense table. He looks different. The arrogance is still there, but he looks tired. He is facing a lifetime behind bars. Most defendants in a high-stakes trial stay silent. They let their lawyers talk. But remember the psychology of this family? Remember the narcissism? Charlie Adelson believes he is the smartest person in the room. He believes he can talk his way out of anything. So, he takes the stand. For days, Charlie tells the jury a story that sounds like a movie script. He looks them in the eye and says,
I didn't hire them. They ended Dan's life on their own, and then they came to me and demanded money. I paid them because I was scared for my life.
He tried to flip the script. He tried to paint himself as a victim, not a villain. It was a masterclass in manipulation. He had an answer for every question, a reason for every phone call. He talked fast, using big words, trying to confuse the simple jury members. But the prosecutor, Georgia Kappelman, didn't play his game. She was calm. She was surgical. She played the tapes. She played the Dolce Vita recording where Charlie sounded calm, calculating the costs of the blackmail. She asked the jury a simple question. Does this sound like a terrified victim? Or does this sound like a boss solving a business problem? The jury deliberated. The tension in the courtroom was suffocating. The Adelson family wasn't there. Donna was at home, watching on a screen. The jury returned and the judge asked for their verdict. We, the jury, find the defendant, Charles Adelson, guilty on the most serious charge possible. The air left the room. Charlie, who had smiled and chatted throughout the trial, finally froze. The mask of the wealthy and untouchable dentist cracked. He wasn't a doctor anymore. He was a convict. But the story doesn't end with the gavel. The moment Charlie was convicted, the general, Donna Adelson, knew the war was lost. The insulation was gone. The FBI had climbed over the wall. She didn't wait for the police to knock on her door. She started booking flights, one-way tickets to Vietnam. Why Vietnam? Because it is one of the few countries that does not have an extradition treaty with the United States. She was going to run. Imagine the scene: Miami International Airport, the chaotic noise of travelers. Donna Adelson and her husband are walking down the jet bridge, seconds away from boarding the plane that will take them to freedom. She thinks she has made it, but the FBI was listening to her calls again. Just as she is about to step onto the plane, federal agents swarm the jet bridge. They stop her and they take her phone. They put the handcuffs on the matriarch of the family. How do you catch a family that uses layers of separation to stay clean? You don't chase them. You don't try to find physical evidence that doesn't exist. You make them turn on themselves. The bump didn't just give the police evidence. It destroyed the family's psychology. It made them panic. It made them talk. And in the end, it was their own voices, captured on those wiretaps, that convicted them. The perfect crime wasn't ruined by a witness. It was ruined by a flyer, a hidden microphone, and the arrogance of thinking they were smarter than everyone else. The gavel has banged. The headlines have been written. But when the noise fades, we are left with the silence. And in that silence, there is a tragedy that no verdict can fix. Dan Markel is still gone. 2 young boys are growing up without their father. And now, they are growing up without their uncle, without their grandmother, and with a mother who lives under a cloud of permanent suspicion. The Adelsons wanted control. They wanted to own the children. They wanted to erase Dan Markel from the picture so they could have the perfect family unit in Miami. But look at the irony. It is almost Shakespearean. By trying to control everything, they lost everything. Donna is in a cell. Charlie is in a cell. The family name is destroyed. The money is gone on lawyers, and the perfect family is now scattered across the prison system. We all love our families. We all want to protect our own. But the Adelsons forgot that loyalty without morality is just a conspiracy. When you become so enmeshed with your family that you cannot see right from wrong, you don't become strong. You become dangerous. Dan Markel was a man who believed in the law. He dedicated his life to justice. And in the end, it wasn't a hitman's bullet that had the final say. It was the law. Slow and imperfect, but relentless. The bump was just a piece of paper, but it revealed the truth. You can have all the money in the world, you can have all the degrees, and you can have the smartest lawyers, but you cannot outrun your own conscience. If you found this investigation fascinating, if you want to understand the psychology behind the crimes that make headlines, hit that subscribe button. And tell me in the comments, do you think the police should be allowed to use tricks like the bump? Or is it too manipulative? I want to read your jury verdict below. This is Criminal Zug Zhuang. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.